Jeremy and I would have done it again if given the opportunity.
Do you have any regrets?
I have no regrets. Killing that pedophile was the best day of my life.
What about not being able to see Jeremy?
Jeremy and I have a love that will withstand this.
I'm appalled and disgusted by what I've done. I've hurt your family in a way I can't fix. You're my prayers, and I hope one day you'll be able to forgive me, and that God will bring me peace.
I have sinned. I am guilty of choices that have torn awful wounds in many hearts, rippling destructively through so many precious lives. I have fallen terribly short of the standards of Jesus, who commands to serve each other, to be humble, and to love one another.
We have all heard of some infamous killer couples from long ago, Bonnie and Clyde, for example. But it's less common to hear about couples who not only killed together, but were captured and forced to face life in prison. People will do a lot of crazy and desperate things for love, but to kill someone, perhaps even an innocent person for love, is less heard of. These are the stories of killer couples who found out that they would be spending the rest of their lives not only apart, but behind bars. Those that commit crimes against women and children are some of the most hated members of our society. But typically, it is the justice system that is responsible for taking down these people and making sure that they can never hurt any innocent people again. But every so often, you hear of people that decide to take justice into their own hands. That was exactly what happened in July 2013 in the case of the killer couple, Jeremy and Christine Moody. At 32 years old, Christine Moody was at a difficult place in her life. She had just gotten out of a rough marriage and wanted to start over again. Then she met a 27-year-old, very religious man named Jeremy Moody, and they immediately hit it off. They were married within only months. But their love story quickly turned tragic when they became involved in a horrific double murder.
You couldn't turn the channel without hearing the story.
This was their moment of glory. This was their 15 minutes of fame.
This grisly story dates back to July 21st, 2013, in Union County, South Carolina. A neighbor had stopped by a neighbor's home. The neighbor was a local repairman, and the man was coming by to get his car after having it fixed. But when he arrived at the residence and knocked at the door, there was no response. He poked his head in and was greeted by the neighbor's dogs. While the dogs didn't let him get much closer, he did see that they were smearing some sort of red liquid around. So the man immediately called the police.
As I walked up to the house, I noticed the side door was open. I announced that I was the sheriff's office. No one come to the door.
The officer began to make his way into the home, and the sight that greeted him was nothing short of horrifying. Both of the people were clearly deceased and were covered in gore. It would turn out that the victims were 59-year-old Charles Parker and his 51-year-old wife, Gretchen Parker. Charles actually had a pretty dark secret that maybe a lot of people didn't know about. This was because it had happened years earlier. He was on the national list of people who committed crimes against women and children. Gretchen was not connected to any of these crimes. Now, Jeremy and Christine Moody were aware of Charles Parker's criminal record, and they decided that he did not deserve to live. They also decided that they were going to take matters into their own hands. So they hatched a plan. Jeremy and Christine decided to lie to Charles and tell him that they were having car problems. This allowed them access to the Parker family home. When they got inside, they used multiple weapons to violently murder the older couple. They probably would have gotten away with it if it wasn't for the Parker family video surveillance system. The couple was recognized through the footage and later arrested. They were both charged with murder. Jeremy and Christine were well-known racists. After all, just take a look at some of Jeremy's tattoos. One says white power across his head, and he had another one that said skinhead in big, bold letters around his neck. Clearly, these are people who have a lot of hate in their hearts. This was already a clearly very bizarre case. We know that Jeremy and Christine chose to kill the Parkers because of Charles Parker's criminal history, but why did they choose to kill Gretchen too? And were they sorry for what they had done now that they ended up behind bars with the likelihood of spending the rest of their lives there? There were so many questions unanswered. but wait until you see how they acted in court.
In the courtroom, Christine exhibited signs of euphoric behavior. She looked at her husband as if he was a god and was completely enamored by him and a little bit disassociated from what was actually happening. It was as if she wasn't actually in a courtroom but walking up on her wedding day.
Just look at the giant smile across Christine's face as she makes her way into the courtroom. She was shackled at her wrists and ankles and wearing a tan prison uniform. But it was as if she couldn't contain her glee when she locked eyes with her husband, who was also chained up. He returned the smile when she got up to the bench.
Nobody really knew what to expect going into the plea because we really had no idea what they were going to do. Everything that they'd done up to that point, there were so many bizarre aspects to their behavior, the way they talked, the things they said in jail, the things they said in their confession.
When the prosecutor read the different crimes that Jeremy and Christine were accused of, Christine's smile got even larger, and she even seemed to be nodding along, clearly proud of her actions.
Murder, possession of a firearm during the commission of a violent crime, kidnapping, possession of a firearm during the commission of a violent crime, and burglary in the first degree. Defendants are present in the courtroom with their counsel and have indicated to the counsel their intention to enter a guilty plea.
Now, just listen to this bizarre exchange between the judge and Christine, and particularly how she responds when he asks her if anyone promised her anything to convince her to plead guilty.
These charges today, guilty or not guilty?
Guilty, sir.
You understand, I promised you anything or held out any hope of reward to you in order to get you to plead guilty to these charges.
Just payment for it.
Jeremy and Christine remained in relatively good behavior throughout court, except for the frequent disrespectful smiles and occasional strange remarks. They even expressed feelings of remorse and their intentions to repent for their sins. The prosecutor in this case said that he believed the Moody's remorse was totally fake, and as it would turn out, he was completely right.
All their claims of remorse and repentance were false.
Both of the Moodys changed gears as soon as the judge declared that they would both be spending the rest of their lives in prison. That was when Jeremy made a rude remark about the victims.
That's what they deserve. Had to do it over again, I'd kill more.
Then Christine lashed out saying how much she enjoyed taking out the victims. This is some truly crazy footage.
I think Jeremy and I would have done it again if given the opportunity.
Do you have any regrets?
I have no regrets. Killing that pedophile was the best day of my life.
What about not being able to see Jeremy?
Jeremy and I have a love that will withstand this.
What about what you said in court about repenting? Is that not true then?
No, it's not true. My lawyer made me say it.
Do you have anything to say to the victim's family?
May they die also.
For now, Jeremy and Christine Moody are locked up in separate prisons where they are likely going to remain for the rest of their lives. Do you believe that they deserve the sentence that they got, or were their actions in any way justified? Let us know in the comments. Imagine two grown adults hiring a 16-year-old babysitter to help care for their children, only to use and abuse her in the most horrific and manipulative ways. That is what Dee and Eric Millberg did in this sickening story. It was 2015, and then 39-year-old Dee Millberg and her then husband, Eric Millberg, both of Salt Lake City, Utah, hired 16-year-old Alexis Rasmussen as a babysitter for their two younger daughters. But their intentions were far from pure. They eventually became close friends with Alexis and began to engage in intimate group encounters. This was criminal behavior considering that Alexis was underage. But it didn't end there. They would also provide the teenager with illegal substances that they would all use at the Millberg house together. Before long, the Millbergs began paying Alexis for her babysitting services with the illegal substances instead of money. Things became more and more heated and dangerous in the months leading up to the teen's death. On August 11th, 2015, the couple invited Alexis over. They wanted her help babysitting because they needed to go out and do some shopping for their daughter's birthday. Alexis did come over, but nothing else went as planned. After the teen arrived, Eric personally administered multiple illegal substances into her system. They then began engaging in other inappropriate activities. While Dee claims that she did not participate in this encounter, she also didn't stop it. She knew that the teen had far too many substances in her system and was not in the right state of mind. Dee also knew that the teenager was not safe around Eric, who was out on parole at the time after committing burglary. He also happened to be part of a very dangerous white supremacist group that disliked minorities. This was not someone that a young girl should be spending time alone with, and it wouldn't be long before it turned tragic. While incredibly disoriented, Alexis began to respond poorly to the substances that had been administered. This caused her to become very anxious. The teen said that she felt really cold and couldn't warm up. She ended up taking a hot bath in the couple's bathroom, but it still wasn't enough to get her warmed up. The couple reportedly wrapped her up in a blanket and told her to lie down and sleep it off. By the time they returned to check on her, it was clear that Alexis was in a very bad state. She was not responding to anything and had some discharge on her face. This would have been the time to have called 911 and maybe saved the young girl's life. But for whatever reason, they chose not to do this. Instead, they flew into a panic and all they could think about was themselves. They were afraid that they would both go to prison or that their daughters would be taken away from them. So instead, they tried to cover everything up. They put Alexis in a box and then drove all over town depositing evidence. They got rid of her purse and her clothing and dumped her body in a remote area, covering it up with dirt and shrubbery to make it harder to find. Perhaps one of the most disturbing aspects of all of this is that they took one of their young daughters with them in the car as they did all this. Their other daughter, who was just 6 years old, was left at home alone. Perhaps they worried she would be old enough to understand what was going on and tell someone. Sadly, it would take 6 weeks before law enforcement were able to locate Alexis's body. This was only after Eric ended up telling a member of his gang, who then went and tipped off law enforcement. Both Dia and Eric were arrested and charged in connection with Alexis's death, but the court later determined that Dia did not have direct involvement, and so she was able to bail out of jail. She would later plead guilty to multiple charges, including desecration of a body and obstruction of justice. In court, Alexis's mother, Dawn, said that she regretted ever letting her daughter babysit for the Millbergs, and that if she had any idea what was going on there, she would have stopped it.
Family and friends have to live with Dia's choices every day. Although I would never have made the choices Dia did with my daughter, I go back over and over again thinking about what I could have done to make things different. I wonder if she ever does the same thing.
Dia, who filed for divorce from Eric after her arrest, also had time to speak out on her own behalf at the sentencing.
I'm appalled and disgusted by what I've done. I've hurt your family in a way I can't fix. You're in my prayers, and I hope one day you'll be able to forgive me. And that God will bring peace.
She went on to say that she believed that she deserved the consequences that she knew were coming her way, and that she wasn't going to try to fight them.
I'm not going to make excuses for what I've done. I think it would only make things worse. I have no way to express the magnitude of grief that I feel for Alexis' family for what I've done. But I take responsibility.
The judge acknowledged that Dia's family, especially her young daughters, had also been greatly affected by everything that happened. After all, they would be losing both of their parents, at least for a little while. But at the end of the day, it was Alexis's family that would have to endure the most suffering.
And I know defendants get tired of this, but with all due respect, Ms. Millberg, sometimes it's not about the defendant. I know you have needs, I know you have children, I know you have families.
At this point, it may almost seem as if the judge is having too much compassion for Dia, but he doesn't forget to acknowledge exactly how horrific her actions really were.
But sometimes, you do such acts that are such extreme and so heinous and depraved, burying this young girl's body and hiding it from the police. You've got to balance that, and you have to put it all in perspective.
She was ultimately sentenced in 2014 to spend 5 years behind bars. To many, this seemed like a shockingly mild sentence considering everything that happened. She has since been released from prison. Meanwhile, Eric, who the court believed played the biggest part in Alexis's death, was convicted of homicide among other charges and sentenced to 6 years to life behind bars. Do you believe that it is fair that Dia only had to spend 5 years in prison? Even if she didn't personally administer the substances to Alexis on the day she died, she certainly could have done more to try to save the teenager's life. Let us know what you think in the comments.
You think I don't? I do, okay? And you're making it worse. You're It was a gruesome case that caught national attention. A mother and her boyfriend sent to prison after her son was found buried in the backyard of their home. Larissa and Christopher Rodriguez never admitted in court they were involved in the little boy's death.
Court officials have to hear the details of horrible criminal cases all the time. In many cases, these details are disturbing, sickening, and hard to hear. But to many people who work in law enforcement, including judges, this becomes the norm for them. However, every so often they may hear stories that are so awful that they cannot hold back their true emotions. This is what happened in the case of Larissa and Christopher Rodriguez. These people did things so cruel and heartless to a sweet little 5-year-old boy that the judge presiding over their case broke down in tears for the first time in 22 years in court. Larissa of Cleveland, Ohio, had an adorable son named Jordan. He was known to be very kind and sweet. He also had some special needs and developmental delays. Tragically, he was believed to be the victim of some pretty horrific maltreatment at the hands of Larissa and her boyfriend, Christopher. While we may never know exactly what led up to the final hours of this little boy's life, we do know that he was badly injured and non-responsive in September 2017 when Christopher carried him into Larissa's bedroom. Rather than calling 911 in efforts to save the boy's life, the couple put him in a cold shower to wake him up. When that didn't work, they left him unattended in Larissa's bed for over a day. He did not survive. Christopher and Larissa, likely concerned about what sort of consequences they would face for being abusive and negligent parents, decided not to report the death. Rather, they opted to bury the little boy in their backyard. They treated him with less than dignity than most would even treat a deceased pet. It wasn't until months later that Christopher ended up confessing what he had done to his brother Scott, who was overseas serving in the military at the time. Scott was horrified and told his brother to turn himself in to law enforcement. When he later discovered he had failed to do so, Scott ended up turning him in himself. It took 2 days of digging outside of Larissa's apartment before a search team was able to locate the little boy's body on December 16th. At that point in time, it was too late to determine exactly how the young boy had passed away, but it was clear that he had been severely wounded. Both Larissa and Chris were arrested in connection with the child's murder, but neither wanted to open up and talk about what had happened.
You do have a right to remain silent.
That's exactly what Larissa Rodriguez did. Stay silent. For months, we never heard from Rodriguez or her boyfriend Christopher about what happened to her son Jordan until now.
While she did not explicitly say how Jordan passed away, she did admit to choosing to bury him in the yard.
I was sitting with Jordan. It was like Jordan gave me his last words.
Rodriguez admits to detectives that she and her boyfriend buried her son in their backyard.
It was Christopher's idea to bury your son in the backyard?
It was my idea.
She went on to say that Christopher had agreed to help her bury Jordan in the yard, and she said that her reason for doing this instead of having a proper burial for him was because she wanted his body close and wasn't ready to let him go. Larissa strongly denied ever having done anything to hurt her son. She did, however, admit she knew Christopher had.
Never touched my son.
Did he actually physically abuse him? Did you see him?
A few times.
As for why Larissa didn't take her son to the hospital, despite knowing how badly he was hurt, she claimed she was afraid that all her other children would be taken from her. Both she and Christopher ultimately pleaded guilty to several serious charges, including manslaughter, child abuse, and abuse of a corpse. They were able to get a plea deal to avoid a murder trial. If they were convicted of murder, there would have been a good chance that they'd be spending the rest of their lives in jail. But they certainly weren't able to avoid a lengthy prison sentence by any means, nor were they able to avoid a scolding from the judge. Judge Nancy Margaret Russo started her statement at the sentencing hearing by commending Scott Rodriguez for doing the hard but brave thing of turning in his own brother for murder. She then acknowledged members of law enforcement who had the horrific and troubling task of having to dig up and see the little body of a boy in such a disturbing state. When the photos of Jordan were shown in court, Judge Russo teared up.
And I look at these photographs, and it's very hard. And I think you should be recognized more for the difficulty of what you do. And the same to the state and to the defense. This is equally difficult for you.
She called Christopher out for failing to tell the truth about what really happened that led up to poor Jordan's death.
I know as a judge I'm not supposed to show emotion. And in 22 years, I never have. This is one of the worst things I've ever seen in my life. And I don't understand, Mr. Rodriguez, why you don't want to cleanse yourself and tell the truth about what happened here.
Tears ran down Larissa's face as the judge began to read off the sentence. Christopher had no emotion to show.
I don't know how either one of you live with yourself. The court imposed a sentence as follows.
Ultimately, Judge Russo chose to impose the maximum sentence that she could by sending Christopher to jail for 28 years, and Larissa was sentenced to 25 years.
I have sinned. I am guilty of choices that have torn awful wounds in many hearts, rippling destructively through so many precious lives. I have fallen terribly short of the standards of Jesus, who commands to serve each other, to be humble, and to love one another.
This is the case of a classic love triangle gone terribly wrong. At one point in time, Sabrina Lyman and her husband Robert were a very popular and well-loved couple in the small community of Silver Lake, California. They were known for throwing crazy parties and seemed to be the perfect match, but their marriage was hardly typical. Sabrina and Robert liked to keep things spicy and fun, and so they decided to open up their marriage to other people. While this may be some people's personal preference, it's easy to see how this could lead to problems down the road. After years of this sort of lifestyle, Sabrina wanted to go back to a more normal and traditional life. But Robert was reportedly perfectly happy with how things were at the time. And then in August 2014, tragedy struck. Robert was killed at work in what appeared to be a robbery gone bad. He left behind 2 children and his supposedly grieving wife. Detectives took a look at surveillance footage from the day of the crime and noticed one seemingly suspicious man on a motorcycle. This man would later be identified as a young firefighter by the name of Jonathan Hearn. As it turns out, Jonathan and Sabrina had been having a secret relationship behind Robert's back. Suspecting the two could have had something to do with his murder, detectives began tapping their phones and reading the messages they exchanged with each other. Before long, they had enough incriminating information to charge both of them in connection with Robert's murder. While Sabrina was released just days later because there wasn't enough evidence against her, Jonathan stayed in custody and was charged with murder. He was possibly looking at a lifetime behind bars. However, he was offered a plea deal if he confessed and testified about Sabrina's role in the murder, and he decided to take it. Jonathan admitted that Sabrina didn't want to divorce her husband and would rather that he died. Since Jonathan was in love with her, he decided to carry out her plan. Because of his testimony, Jonathan received 25 years in prison, and Sabrina was arrested once again. Still, she denied having any involvement in her late husband's murder, but this time she could not escape the justice system. She was found guilty on February 21st, 2018, and sentenced to 25 years behind bars.
I'm sorry for, acting immature on the road. I understand that, being on the road, you do have other people's lives in your hand. And, I should have thought about that.
This is a story of a young man from Cleveland who took a situation that was not that bad and made it 100 times worse. 19-year-old Cyrus Matthews was facing a misdemeanor charge for a road rage incident. He was only facing at most 60 days behind bars. While this is certainly not ideal, it was nothing compared to the trouble he was about to get himself in.
Is there any way that we can reverse this jail time?
Well, you're going to go to jail today. If you need to get out to attend the hearing, we can consider furloughs. Okay, but right now you're going to go to jail today.
Cyrus made it very clear that he was not happy about the judge's decision and decided to make the worst decision of his life: make a run for it. While the judge calls out for Cyrus to be charged with felony escape, his lawyer attempts to get him to see reason. Meanwhile, Cyrus's girlfriend could be seen quickly leaving the courtroom. Cyrus hesitated for a second, but ultimately ended up running to the parking lot and jumping into the driver's seat of his girlfriend's car. They then sped off, but didn't get far. Cyrus, while trying to speed away, ended up hitting another vehicle containing 3 passengers and ended up slamming into a gas station. The passengers, including a baby, received non-life-threatening injuries. But take a look at what Cyrus's escape car, a Buick LeSabre, looked like after the crash. It's clear just how bad things could have gotten. Cyrus and his girlfriend were extracted from the vehicle and taken to the hospital. He was later taken back into custody. Now, instead of spending just 60 days in jail, Cyrus was charged with felonious assault and sentenced to 425 days in jail. This just goes to show that thinking rationally is usually going to get you into a lot less trouble than acting on those intrusive thoughts. Cyrus's girlfriend, likely because she was not behind the wheel, does not appear to have gotten into any legal trouble. These stories all go to show that no matter how much you think you care about someone, committing crimes to show your dedication is probably only going to lead to a road of trouble. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to subscribe so that you don't miss out on our new upcoming videos.